Now, in this second game, we've got West Ham taking on Manchester City, a very big game, mainly because of the fan bases and partially because of where the teams are in the table. But, well, obviously Manchester City are going to be itching to get a win here, and West Ham are just going to try and continue picking up as many points as they can to get out of the rut that they got themselves into earlier in the season. This game is strange because if the Swansea-Southampton game seemed polarised before, this is an even more polarised game because Manchester City have been, wouldn't say hot and cold this season. They've been quite consistent in what they've done, but when a game goes wrong, it goes very wrong. And Manchester City have shown that they're very vulnerable away from home. West Ham, well, they've also shown that they can be very vulnerable to big defeats. They can also upset teams too. They got that draw at Anfield and they also lost 5-0 to Arsenal. 5-1 to Arsenal. So they've definitely lost big this season and they've pulled off a few upsets. Not as many upsets as they did last season, but they're trying to find their feet a bit here, and I feel like they've got a bit of a grip on things. So there's a chance that they'll be able to put their roots into the ground here and potentially hold out against what's going to be a Man City barrage. Of course, that said, Manchester City could just score one goal and then the rest will just start coming in against West Ham because they have made it a habit to capitulate this season. The red carpet comes out. We've said it previously. The biggest trouble here for Manchester City is that, well, they've probably had a bit of an overinflated ego of late. They've been scoring lots of goals, putting teams away, but really been this far away from losing, really. The game against Everton was a perfect example of what can happen if things go wrong. Manchester City could easily have won that game as well, but they let Everton through the gate and eventually they just piled it on. 4 shots on target, 4 goals, and they didn't score anything. It's very easy for Manchester City to just snap mentally, and away from home in particular, they're very vulnerable. Against Liverpool also, they lost 1-0 that game, but that could easily have been a 4-5-0 thrashing as well. Liverpool missing plenty of chances to counter-attack in that game. We've said this before. West Ham, they've been definitely more solid than how they started off the season. All that West Ham really need here is to get a good counter-attack flow happening, and they could come out on top against Manchester City as well. It's far less likely, of course. Manchester City should be able to stay on top of West Ham, but playing away from home, maybe it might help them that Pep Guardiola has conceded the title race. They've got a bit less pressure on them, but they're still outside the top 4, and they're fighting to get their way back in there. Haven't been getting the results lately, and something needs to change. Really, I guess what I'm saying here is that Manchester City is definitely vulnerable here. And with the odds being so far in Manchester City's favour, I've got no choice but to back West Ham at over $5 here. Not because they're necessarily more likely to win here, but there's just a part of me that feels that when the odds are this far in the other team's favour, and especially when it comes to a team that looks to counter-attack, it tends to build on the other team as the game goes on and makes it a bit more difficult for them to keep their calm away from home. With West Ham being a possibility for an upset here, and not necessarily the most likely result, but going to back West Ham for this one to make the upset happen against Manchester City. And finally, it should be no surprise, the number 1 game is Liverpool against Chelsea.